Oh, hello. Welcome to AP Biology with Mr. Jennings. So today we're going to talk about evolution. Now, evolution is admittedly a little controversial. I don't believe it should be, but it is controversial. Now, most of that controversy comes from a misunderstanding of the topic. See, you need to understand that evolution is a critical concept within biology. All branches of biology really depends on evolution because evolution helps explain all these different forces. It explains where life comes from. It explains how life is related, but also explains how genetics works. It explains how proteins work. It explains how organisms look different, but also explains how they interact, how they behave, why they behave the way they do. All these crazy things in life can be helped explain with evolution. Now, evolution, to the basics, comes down to one simple force. That's not so simple, but it's simple to understand. Natural selection. Now, natural selection is often called the survival of the fittest, and that's kind of true. It's not just that. But natural selection here was popularized by Charles Darwin. Now, he's not the only one to write about this. Alfred Wallace did so as well. They're published together. They're both credited with this theory. But Darwin was the celebrity scientist. He was our Neil deGrasse Tyson of sorts. So that's what he was in the 1800s. So Darwin here writes on the book On the Origin of Species by means of natural selection. It's a dry read, admittedly, not for everybody, but it's the most single important biology book ever made. It's really popular because it's so important, because it explains evolution. But Darwin was very thorough and dry, so I think it's part of where the misconceptions come in. Now, natural selection takes place in several parts. The first one being an overproduction of offspring. So, Robert Malthus, a mathematician at the time of Darwin, postulated that life will always grow, and it will eventually exceed their food supply. The exceeding of their food supply will result in a competition. Now, that means you have to have an overproduction of offspring. That's the very first thing that must take place. In case in point, the sea turtle. Now, these baby little sea turtles here, they're cute, but not all of them are going to live. That's the circle of life, folks. So, all these sea turtles that are here on the beach, only a fraction of them will actually reach the water. Now, once they reach the water, their chances of survival dramatically increase. But until they reach the water, they do not. Now, the mother, knowing that they will not be there for the eggs hatching, instead will lay dozens of eggs at a time. Ensuring, though, that would increase their odds. It's basically you're playing the game more times than not. And if you know you have a high mortality rate amongst, infants in your species, you want to have a lot of, infants. It just helps keep the game going. So think about all these different organisms, plants, fungus, insects, running into the animals. We can talk about fish, amphibians, actually a lot of mammals like your rodents, reptiles. All these organisms tend to reproduce more kids than will ever make it to adulthood. And that's important because that increases your chance of having offspring make it to adulthood and carrying on your genes. But that's not all. So not only do you have to have an overproduction of offspring, you need to have genetic variation amongst your individuals. That means things need to be different. Now, they can be physical, like the butterfly here. Each of these butterflies represents the same species. They look all similar. You can kind of tell they look like the same species, but they're not the same. They're not different enough to be different species. But I want to make sure you know variation amongst individuals does not have to be genetic only. It could be, it doesn't have to just be physical only. It is genetic, so it doesn't have to just be physical like you see here. It could be a chemical change. You can have a different type of enzymes to help you survive different environments. It can be a behavioral variation within the population, like avoiding a certain predator or going after a certain type of prey or food. Those are things that matter. And this here is the single most important thing. Without this, natural selection just doesn't happen. So, you over-reproduce, more kids are born than make it to adulthood. You have a high variation within that population. Next, you compete. Now, differential competition is a major factor here. This is what Malthus was really going at. You're having less resources, and so you're going to have to compete for all those resources amongst the members of your own species and other environmental factors, other individuals in that area. So competition for limited resources is huge. Now, competition can be for mates, it can be for food, water, shelter. Actually, competition can be avoiding a predator, avoid being eaten. You just outcompete your friend. It seems gruesome, but the one that lives longer tends to be more successful. And that really brings us to the fourth topic. Successful competitors survive. And not only do they survive, they're more likely to reproduce, and the things that made them successful, those genetic traits, will be passed on to their offspring. Their offspring will inherit those traits that made them successful. So the offspring will have a higher chance of success. And that's called fitness. This ability to survive and reproduce is fitness. This is not fitness in terms of a physical sense. It is a sense of reproductive success. And we have the cheetah here. This example, it's okay. It's the best one I could find. Now, you read steps 1 through 4 for millions of years. So you over-reproduce, you have variation within that population, you have high competition rates, and you have successful competitors. You have those 4 things happening. And over thousands of millions of years, those 4 things will wage on each other. And eventually, life will adapt to the environment. And sometimes it can adapt a lot quicker than a million years. It can adapt within a matter of 5, 2, 1 days, if you're talking about microscopic organisms. So, life will always find a way, to quote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. Not enough thumbs on that, but life will find a way to adapt to its surroundings. It's not limited to where it is. Alright, let's bring it in. So, natural selection is the main driving force of evolution. Now, evolution is really not that complicated. It can get really complicated, but as a basis, it's not. Natural selection is not the only way it does this, but it's the main one. And natural selection makes it 4 parts. You have over-reproduction of offspring. More kids are going to be born than live. You're going to have variation within the offspring. More kids are going to look different from each other. Because of that, you're going to have competition. Now, that competition means not every individual is going to be successful. Some are, some aren't. And eventually, the ones that are successful, the things that made them successful, will be passed on to their kids. If you repeat that for millions of years, and that's what step 5 is, you'll eventually get a life adaptation. Now, will you get a new species? Who knows? That's the topic for another time. So, thank you for watching. Take care.